I just set up a simple planted tank for my Betta fish Sonic because unfortunately he didn't get along with his community tank roommates. Some of you asked for step-by-step instructions, so here's my very detailed tutorial. Hi, I'm Irene with girltalksfish, and it's been 3 years since I posted my first how to set up an easy planted Betta tank video. I've learned a lot since then, so the first thing you actually want to do is not buy an aquarium, but get the filter going. I went with a sponge filter because it's got very gentle flow, great for betta fins, and it's not going to flood my tank. Plus the Aquarium Co-op Nano version is pretty easy to hide. It's got green and black colors, which blends in with a planted tank, and it won't clog easily because it's made of very coarse foam. I won't go into the whole installation because I've got the tutorial over here, but I like to add a never clog air stone because it makes the filter a lot more efficient and it eliminates that annoying bubbling sound. So yeah, once I put the filter together, I actually had it running in another established aquarium, and I'd recommend for at least 2 weeks to seed it. The longer, the better. Step 2 is to find the perfect location. You want someplace away from direct sunlight, air vents, any doors leading to the outside where a lot of cold or hot air comes in, as well as high traffic areas where kids or dogs could crash into. Ideally, you also want it near a power outlet as well as some kind of water source, because for me, I'm going to be using buckets to change water because my Python no-spill water change system is a little bit too heavy duty for a tiny tank like this. For me, I decided to put it right next to my office desk so that it would be, something I could look at while I'm working. And this is a Craigslist find that I got and a friend helped me paint it. So just don't forget that your aquarium stand should be able to support about 10 pounds per gallon. So for a 5-gallon tank, it should support about 50 pounds. Step 3, now we can get the aquarium. So I went with an Aquarium 5.5 rimless tank from Petco, mainly because I couldn't find the cheaper rimmed version. This does come with braces that you can add so that later on I can put a lid on it. Bettas do like to jump, and Colorado has very dry weather, and I don't like to deal with having to top off from evaporation all the time. In the past, I've actually had some used aquariums that I purchased from Craigslist end up leaking on me, so I just to be extra, even though it was brand new, I did a leak test in the tub. And then for the background, I've had some glossy backgrounds that I got from pet stores be a little bit too reflective for my betta fish, where they started flaring at their reflection all the time. So I went with a matte black poster board, cut it out, and then used good old Scotch tape to attach it to the bottom rim and a little bit on the top edge. Step 4, planted tank lighting. So I went with the Phoenix Stingray LED clip-on light, which I already had for a previous tank. Supposedly it's supposed to be like medium strength lighting for a 5-gallon tank, but now that I've used it for a while, I find it to be pretty dim, so I would consider it more of a low light. This is not a programmable light, so I had a Wi-Fi timer laying around, but you can use a regular old mechanical or digital timer. It doesn't really matter. I set it for 6 hours at first and then have gradually increased the lighting over time. So currently I'm at 8.5 hours. Step 5 is substrate. So I typically go with Carob Sea Eco Complete. It's an inert planted tank substrate that you can buy from Petco. It's not going to dissolve or turn into muddy silt over time, but it does come soaking in fertilizer water. So I like to drain that fertilizer completely, and then you don't need to rinse the substrate. It's fairly clean, but I do find that if I put a lot of that fertilizer water in the aquarium, it does tend to cause an ammonia spike in new aquariums. I added a sparse layer of the stuff into the aquarium and then put a grid of, this is Aquarium Co-op root tabs, so that I didn't have to plug them in later. And then you want a total of 2 to 3 inches. So some people like to make the substrate higher in the back so that there's just some more depth to the aquarium, but this is such a small aquarium, so I didn't really do that this time. Step 6, it is time to put in your equipment, like your heater and filter. And this is my first brain fart. So basically I got really excited and I wanted to put in the live aquarium plants in, but I would actually recommend that you put in the heater and filter first so that you know that you have enough room to work around them. So just ignore the fact that this step was filmed out of order. If you don't live in a tropical climate, Bettas do need an aquarium heater. Sometimes you can get away with 25 watts for a 5-gallon tank, but if you have to raise the temperature by more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit like me, because my husband likes to keep our house cold, then go ahead and get a 50 watt. This is a Aquarium Pro heater, but I don't think they sell the 50 watt version anymore, at least not on Amazon. And because the heater is too tall for this tank, I actually have it laying down, which isn't ideal, but it's gonna work. And hopefully eventually I can hide it with some plants. And because I'm feeling very extra as usual, I have the heater attached to a temperature controller, and I also have a digital thermometer probe that has high and low alarms. So that means if the heater breaks and it's too hot, or if I leave the heater unplugged and it gets too cold, I will hear beeping sounds that will alert me that something is out of whack. As you may have guessed, there is a power strip to run all of these electronics. So I have a USB air pump for the sponge filter that's plugged into a USB backup battery, just in case of a power outage, because that does happen where I am. I have the light plugged into the Wi-Fi timer, and then, like I said before, the heater is plugged into the temperature controller because I want to waste more money. Step 7, the live aquarium plants. Now we're getting to have some fun. So some of these were taken from existing aquariums, and then others were purchased from Aquarium Co-op through their online shipping service or my local fish store. I decided to put this large Anubias that I don't know what the species is, but it came from a local fish auction, and it's going to be on the right side with a mini Bulbitis planted in front, because in general you want to put tall plants in the background and shorter plants in the foreground, kind of like a bleacher style seating arrangement so you can see everything. Because of that arrangement, I decided to move the light to the left-hand side so that there would be less direct light on the slower growing plants and therefore less algae, hopefully. That also means that I'm going to put my sponge filter and most of the wiring on the right-hand side, just because I don't want the sponge filter kind of splashing on the light as much. Once I got some of these epiphyte plants situated, I went ahead and added some water so that I could support the taller stem plants I was about to add, and that will prevent them from bending over and breaking so much. So don't forget to add your dechlorinator. I like this Fritz water conditioner that comes with the pump head, makes dosing really easy. And then if you don't want to mess up your substrate or your aquascape, if you did design something, go ahead and add water using a colander or even a plastic bag laying on the substrate so that it won't mess up everything and make a huge dent. This is water Sprite that I'm adding, and you can use plant weights on the bottom of the stems if you find that they're floating away and not staying in the substrate for some reason. Afterwards, I filled up the rest of the water, and then I quote-unquote planted the dwarf aquarium lily bulb, which is basically just resting it on the substrate. I made the decision to add very little hardscape just because I already knew that Sonic is pretty prone to fin tears, which leads to fin rot, and I didn't want to deal with that, so it was just a little extra precaution. Probably not necessary, but there you have it. Step 8, we're gonna add the lid. This is an Aquarium Versatop hinged glass aquarium top at 16 inches in length. And it did pop up a little bit because I have that clip-on light and a lot of wires going around. So because I wanted to cover all gaps, I went ahead and lined the back edge with saran wrap. Gonna wipe down that outside surface with a glass cleaning cloth, and then you'll notice some micro bubbles on the aquarium walls, and that just comes because it's winter and I had very cold groundwater, and when you put it into a nice warm aquarium, it's gonna have bubbles of oxygen come out. Everything went pretty smoothly, except when it came to the cycling part. So the filter, as you notice, hadn't been added during the step where I told you to add the equipment because I wanted to seed it a little bit longer. And what do you know, 5 days later, I did measure ammonia because I believe it came from the EcoComplete. So it does, that fertilizer water does cause some nitrogen to go into your water. So if your tank isn't completely cycled, you may want to keep an eye on it and do some extra water changes. Because of that ammonia spike, I did decide to move in the sponge filter a little bit earlier than I had planned, so it had only been seeded for 1.5 weeks, and I don't feel like that was long enough to be able to handle the fertilizer. I ended up still detecting traces of ammonia and nitrite, and I added some bottled bacteria and then more plants, so I would say the tank finished cycling around 3.5 weeks after setup. Now I can finally add Sonic, my betta fish. He was in quarantine during this whole period with another cycled sponge filter that was much too large for this tank. Now I've got some extra pro tips here that I picked up from Lizzie, another fellow Aquarium Co-op team member and my high-tech aquascaping friend. So she suggested adding some floating plants. Her favorite is dwarf water lettuce. So I picked some up from Etsy, and these will serve to not only suck up some more nutrients in this low-tech tank, but also further block the light from slow-growing plants like Anubias that are really prone to growing algae. Lizzie also convinced me to get a snail. Yes, it's true. I am no longer team kill it with fire. She says that only one nerite snail for a 5-gallon tank is necessary, and I can see why that's true after I've kept him a while, because I've found that Sonic, my betta, tends to outcompete the snail for food. So he has to primarily live on algae and the occasional nano banquet block that I drop in there. Eggman does a great job of cleaning the glass and the large Anubias leaves, as well as the biofilm that form on my dwarf aquarium lily bulb. He does climb upside down on the lid, so I'm really glad I added that saran wrap on the lid. As much as I would love to tell you that Sonic and Eggman lived happily ever after in their amazing jungle-style planted tank, paradise didn't last long. That's right, you're watching part 2 of Sonic's saga. So up here is the video of how I first got Sonic and his never-ending troubles with fin rot, and then down here in the future, I'm going to be linking the story of how I poisoned this entire planted tank and had to redo everything. Hope you take time to enjoy your aquariums, and I'll see you in the next video.